Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Kavya Rai, Assistant Program Manager for the Postgraduate Program in Public Policy, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is Bhumika Sevkani, Research Analyst with the Indo-Pacific Studies Program at the Takshashila Institution. Her work focuses on China's new energy sector. Hi, Bhumika. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Kavya. Thank you for that introduction.
Bhumika, to set the stage, the EU recently moved from an anti-subsidy investigation to imposing definitive duties on Chinese electronic vehicles or EVs. We often hear that tariffs are a blunt instrument. In the context of the EV market, why are traditional tariffs struggling to level the playing field as intended?
Right, Kavya. So about this dispute regarding EVs between the European Union and China. So let me just set a bit of a context here that the anti-subsidy investigations were concluded way before, and the tariffs were imposed on Chinese EVs in late 2024. Owing to the subsidies that they receive, the tax breaks, and therefore the unfair competition that it unleashes on the European car makers. So the tariffs are ranging somewhere between, and those are on top of the additional, the baseline 10% of duty that already applies, and the tariffs can go as much as up to 45-50%. But then, why do we say that tariffs have been a blunt instrument in this particular case? Is what they initially set out to achieve was not something that we saw as an impact post tariffs on Chinese EVs, right? So the initial objective was to level the playing field for European car makers and sort of make it a fair competition, increase the prices of Chinese EVs for European consumers. But what happened is that instead of, so this impact was not very much visible in the European EV market, even after tariffs. The Chinese EVs continued with their share. But as an unintended consequence, what we saw is that the consumers and the market started to shift their focus from battery electric vehicles, which were subject to import duties, from battery electric vehicles to fully hybrid and plug-in hybrid EVs in the European market. So what happened is Chinese car makers that were previously supplying battery electric vehicles now shifted their focus to increasing the volume of exports to the EU of hybrid electric vehicles, right? So what happened is that between December 24 to 25, just the sale of plug-in hybrids went up about 36.7% within the European market. And again, Chinese EV brands like BYD ended up tripling their market share between the same period, right? So what we saw is continued market share and growth of Chinese EVs as well as hybrid EVs despite the tariffs. By late 2025, Chinese brands held roughly 11% of the European EV market. I think this figure does not count the hybrid vehicles as of now, but right. So the other impact that was supposed to happen because of this is a boost in production of European car makers. But again, that wasn't seen as well. So this is a similar case to what happened with the solar industry, right? So with time, the European solar industry lost to its Chinese competitors, both in technology and in cost competitiveness. And the similar story seems to be repeating with the EV market as well. And another way that Chinese car makers did is that they started accelerating their plans to build factories within Europe. But then again, we're yet to see what value addition is that bringing to the European economy, or are those just assembly factories and contribute very little to local employment as well? One example is the upcoming BYD facility in Hungary, which is, I think, scheduled to trial production from early 2026. But again, we're yet to see the impact of that move to manufacture within Europe. So, all in all, the Chinese manufacturers have also been able to absorb some of those losses, but keep their prices within the similar range, just because exporting to markets like Europe and Southeast Asia is the only option that they have left because of the overcapacity that they're facing domestically. So, because of all these reasons, just to sum it up, that we didn't see any change in market share of Chinese EVs in the European market. We saw diversification. We saw a shift to plug-in and full hybrid EVs, which again the Chinese EV makers are stepping up in. So all in all, tariffs did not sort of achieve what they were set out to.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting, especially the pivot that has happened from to hybrid vehicles that you spoke about. So this brings us to the newest turn in this dispute. The EU and China are now talking about minimum import prices, or MIPs, as an alternate to duties. So can you explain how this mechanism works, and also why is China pushing for this instead of duties?
Right. So going back a little, what happened after EU imposed tariffs is China obviously started to retaliate. So we witnessed this small trade dispute between the EU and China, wherein China had announced countermeasures and imposed import duties on European dairy products and agricultural products that enter into the Chinese market, and also the luxury car segment that the Europeans export to China. So this was again another setback for the Europeans as well. And then what was also happening is that several European car makers have set up their factories and manufacture within China. So they were also required to pay these extra duties when they were manufacturing their cars in China and then importing into the EU. So, because of that, not only the Chinese, since the beginning of the anti subsidy investigations, not only the Chinese have tried to negotiate with the EU for minimum import prices instead of tariffs, but European car makers themselves have also been trying to push the European government to replace tariffs with minimum import prices. So, how is this mechanism going to work? Is that so the car manufacturers, those who want to import from China, will have to submit a proposal, a price undertaking on what prices they are willing to sell within the EU. And that has to be specific to each model. So, and then the European Commission will be looking at those undertakings and the proposals of the undertakings. And if those proposals of price undertakings compensate for the harmful effect of subsidies and do not have this loophole of cross compensation, the Commission will approve those price undertakings, and then the manufacturer can then export to the EU. So that is the whole mechanism that they've planned. And as we can already figure it out, that it is going to be an administratively complex tool for the EU to administer, because despite the approvals and the investigations that they take, cross compensation within companies and within models can be really easy to figure out, can be a really easy loophole that the companies can use, right? And this administrative complex mechanism of minimum import prices and sort of import quota, that can also, it also makes the whole process a little opaque, wherein the import is subject to the Commission's approval. The price undertakings are also subject to Commission's approval. So what we can end up seeing here is that Europe ends up favoring their own car manufacturers, which are, as I said, manufacturing in China and then sort of importing. So this whole tool is sort of, we've seen that it's all administrative complex and rarely successful in sort of achieving what it again set out to. But we can see the incentives that it can provide to European car makers, and which is why this might be a reason that the European Commission has adopted this strategy.
Okay. So it actually doesn't sound like China is reacting defensively at all. It sounds very calculated. So they know what is happening, like what they're doing. And also this comes to a bigger question about leverage in this relationship between China and the European Union. So, what do you think? Does this suggest that Beijing hasn't just weathered the storm, but actually out leveraged the EU into a deal that favors Chinese margins over European competition?
So that's really interesting, right? That China has not sort of reacted, uh, let's say, aggressively on the anti-subsidy probes and the tariffs that were consequently put onto it. What they have done is that they've tried to sort of stay calm about it, still try to negotiate, and then tried their own countermeasures on the European imports. So, since October 2024, the EU has rolled out about 5 industrial probes into Chinese exports. So it ranges from EVs to wind turbines, solar panels, as well as train manufacturers. So, and these are all anti-subsidy investigations. So, the extent of the conflict has expanded even further, going beyond these green technologies. It also, at a point, included China's public procurement of medical equipments. So, but the Chinese officials, what they have done is, and it was also witnessed in the China EU summit, that they tried to focus on resolving these issues through dialogue and through cooperation. They brought up the talks of comprehensive agreement on investment that was put on the back burner since 2021, saying that as the EU is adopting a more aggressive industrial policy, Beijing is optimistic about its long term odds in the EU market. And the statement also mentioned that it sees no reason to preemptively rein in its domestic industry to sort of give in to the demands coming from Brussels. So Chinese policymakers, I'd say here, are trying to play a longer game, calling for dialogue, deepening trade and investment ties with the EU countries, and this has also sort of created a difference of opinions within the European members. So some of the European members are sort of taking this harder stance against China, whereas some of them have started to recognize their dependencies on China and are sort of ready to cooperate, given that they also get a fair share of the pie, right? So this also reflects a sort of confidence in Beijing and its ability to manage ties with the European Union, and not sacrificing or giving in to its demand very easily.
Right. So I think that's where you make a crucial point. So China's playing the long game. So what looks like restraint on the surface might actually be confidence underneath it all.
Right.
And so if China believes that the EU is too divided internally to sustain a hard line, then there's very little incentive for Beijing to slow down its own industrial strategy. And the emphasis on bilateral ties with individual member states seem to be designed to take advantage of these fractures between EU states. So this also puts EU in an uncomfortable position globally. So let us just take a step back from EVs specifically. What does this entire unfolding of trade disputes suggest about the EU's position in the global economy? And how do you think the EU will choose to move ahead with its trade relations with China?
Right, Kavya, that's a very interesting question to sort of zoom out a little. What we see here is, with this particular case, is how EU is sort of losing its leverage politically in the global stage here. But it also suggests a weakening economy within the EU, right? So addressing these trade imbalances, it requires acknowledging from the European members of weak productivity of their economies, as well as this scenario not just in EVs, but in other green technologies and in more such areas, has also come from China's export-driven growth strategy. So to tackle this, I think the EU has also sort of signaled somewhere where they want to prioritize utilizing domestic investments and savings to boost innovation and competitiveness within their own industries, specifically for their crown jewel industries like the automotive. But on the other hand, EU is also, I think, considering opening its market to Chinese investments, particularly in sectors where China holds a leading position, sort of in both technology as well as the manufacturing processes of it. So I think going ahead, you will, especially after the whole tariffs coming from the US and the global uncertainty that we see today, I think the EU is going to both meet China midway as well as diversify its options away from this dependencies.
Right. So opening selectively to Chinese investments while also strengthening domestic competitiveness is a far more difficult path than tariffs. But perhaps that's a more realistic one for the EU. So,
Absolutely.
Bhumika, thank you so much for walking us through what is clearly more than just a trade dispute. This is about industrial strategy, climate goals, and the limits of existing economic tools in a changing global order. So, thank you so much for joining us today and walking us through this dispute. Before we end, I'd also like to announce that applications are now open for the next cohort of the postgraduate program in public policy. If you're interested, do visit our website for more details. So, thank you once again, Bhumika, for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for tuning into All Things Policy.
Thanks, Kavya.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaInst or our website takshashila.org.in.